What if the timeline for one of the most feared predators of the Permian was millions of years older than any textbook suggested? For too long, paleontologists believe the age of saber-toothed hunters began later and in cooler climates. Now a stunning discovery on the island of Majorca of a tiny Gorgonopsid predator no bigger than a modern cat has completely shattered that narrative. This single fossil, the oldest of its kind ever found, doesn't just push back the evolutionary clock, it proves these early ancestors of mammals were pioneering tropical ecosystems across the supercontinent Pangaea. Get ready to forget everything you thought you knew about where and when the first great therapsids arose. How does a fossil smaller than a household pet end up reshaping how paleontologists picture the earliest stages of mammal ancestry? The trail leads back to Majorca, a Mediterranean island better known for beaches today, but once part of a very different Permian landscape. In deposits that were once seasonal floodplains, researchers uncovered the remains of a saber-toothed therapsid. Its location near the equator, rather than at the cooler paleolatitudes thought to host early therapsids, immediately raised questions. The bones offered a rare glimpse into both anatomy and timing, and they did not fit neatly with the story that textbooks had sketched so far. What the team recovered went beyond a stray tooth or a ribbon of jaw. Cranial fragments gave enough detail to estimate a skull length of about 18 centimeters, when complete, small for the group, and closer to a cat in scale than to the biggest predators usually associated with the name Gorgonopsian. Portions of the axial skeleton were present, along with much of the articulated left hind limb, including a distinctly bowed tibia and fibula that would prove especially significant. Taken together, these parts provided direct evidence that a carnivorous synapsid had been alive and active in a place no one expected. For a lineage long thought tied to cooler temperate regions, its presence in the tropics was the paleontological equivalent of finding a cold weather hunter living comfortably in the heat. It broke assumptions and forced a new round of questions. Size only deepened the puzzle. The large South African Gorgonopsians, like Inostrancevia, often carried skulls more than half a meter long and stood out as dominant apex predators. The Majorcan fossil was the opposite. At 1/3 of that size, with refined canines and slender jaw proportions, it represented a lightweight hunter. Yet its dentry confirmed the full complement of sharp incisors in large canines and post-canine teeth expected from the group. In design, it fit squarely within Gorgonopsians, but in scale, it looked like a miniature version of the towering hunters that came much later. The impression was of an agile predator adapted for speed, not a plodding ambush specialist. The rocks containing it added another layer of surprise. Stratigraphic evidence places the fossil in the late Ciceralian, between the Artinskian and Kungurian stages, a range of about 285 to 270 million years ago, older than almost any therapsid yet documented. Most earlier studies had the Gorgonopsian lineage appearing nearer the middle Permian, suggesting a later diversification after earlier synapsids like pelycosaurs had already waned. This specimen pushed that origin back by many millions of years. If correct, it indicates that Gorgonopsians and perhaps other therapsids were evolving and spreading much earlier than believed, and that their earliest stages included tropical representatives. The researchers, however, urge caution. This fossil is likely the oldest known Gorgonopsian, possibly even among the oldest therapsids overall, but it is not yet a new species. Naming awaits further samples, and the details of its relationships remain uncertain. Still, the find matters. It places a member of the group in a region and time where none had been expected, implying a more complex picture of early therapsid evolution. Just one well-preserved individual can shift timelines and geographic maps, demonstrating how fragile prior assumptions can be when faced with new evidence. Taken together, the location, the small size, and the early date suggest that long before the iconic saber-toothed giants of South Africa dominated their ecosystems, smaller and more nimble relatives were already carving out niches in equatorial floodplains. It is a reminder that evolutionary history does not unfold in a single, predictable direction. And the bones themselves hold an even more practical clue hidden in those curved leg elements about how this animal might have moved across its world. The real key to this animal's success lay not in its teeth, but in its legs. Paleontologists call it the semi-erect secret weapon, and it all comes down to the shape of the bones in its lower limbs. In the Mallorcan specimen, the tibia and fibula bow away from each other, creating a large interosseous space, a skeletal feature unique to Gorgonopsians among therapsids. That structural detail is more than an oddity. It signals how the limbs were positioned and how the animal moved when it sprang into action. Most other predators of the time relied on a sprawling posture. Picture a salamander or a large lizard pushing its body forward with legs splayed to the sides. Every step forces a side-to-side sway, constantly wasting energy. It works well enough for slow ambushes, but it is exhausting for anything longer than a short dash. Permian swamps and mudflats would have hosted plenty of hunters with that style of movement, but their range and stamina were limited from the start. The Mallorcan Gorgonopsian shows a different solution. Its femur head appears offset from the shaft, allowing the leg to angle more beneath the body rather than jutting laterally. When combined with the bowed lower leg bones, these points to a posture between full sprawl and the truly upright stance seen in later mammals. That middle ground is what researchers call semi-erect. It was not fully mammal-like, but it was more efficient than a reptilian sprawl. In short, semi-erect means less wasted side-to-side motion and longer, steadier chases. Biomechanically, the difference is easy to visualize. When legs are tucked closer in, the body moves forward instead of rolling back and forth. Each stride directs energy straight into the ground, propelling the animal ahead instead of rocking its torso. That kind of efficiency adds up. A chase that would exhaust a sprawling predator after a few lunges became sustainable for much longer in this animal. Even a small hunter gained a decisive edge when the prey could run. The specimen also confirmed that these traits weren't quirks of a juvenile still growing into its limbs. The bones were well ossified, meaning they belonged to a fully mature individual. That maturity lets paleontologists argue with confidence this Gorgonopsian consistently moved with a semi-erect gait. It was not a one-off posture or an early growth stage, but part of how the entire species hunted and survived. What does that translate to in practice? Imagine an equatorial floodplain subject to seasonal extremes. Herds of bulky herbivores gather at shrinking waterholes during dry spells, scattering quickly when danger appears. A sprawling predator might only manage one clumsy rush before tiring, but a semi-erect hunter could lunge, reset, and attack again as the group broke and bolted. On uneven ground, wet 1 month, baked dry the next. That repeatability spelled the difference between success and starvation. Forelimb strength would have added to this advantage. Gorgonopsians, compared to canids, carried more robust shoulders and arms. Some paleontologists suggest they even used their forelimbs to grapple struggling prey, more like a bear or a saber-toothed cat than a modern dog. The efficiency of semi-erect running brought them close. The power of their forelimbs helped them finish the job. So rather than a sluggish reptilian carnivore creeping along swamp edges, the picture is of a nimble yet muscular hunter, agile enough to reposition quickly and strong enough to control prey once it closes the gap. Its skull teeth and size already challenged assumptions about therapsid origins. Its posture goes one step further, showing that evolutionary experiments in more advanced styles of locomotion were already underway in the early Permian. And with locomotion understood, the next question becomes inescapable. What kind of environment demanded such an efficient hunter, and what creatures was it pursuing across those shifting landscapes? Majorca during the late Permian was not a coastal island, but part of the equatorial belt of Pangaea. The torrent de Nadala deposits preserve it as a semi-arid seasonal floodplain with temporary ponds forming in wet months, shrinking waterholes, concentrating animals in the dry. These silty sandstones, paleosols, and coalified plant traces mark a landscape where meandering rivers periodically spilled into depressions, then pulled back, leaving stranded pools as the climate swung between abundance and scarcity. The wet season filled channels with surface water. Plants flourished quickly, and herds of reptiles and synapsids crowded the margins of shallow lakes. Food and cover were plentiful, making it easier for predators to stalk without being noticed. But as the rain stopped and the heat returned, the same channels fractured into cracked floodplains. Ponds shrank, forcing herbivores and carnivores into the same shrinking space. Survival no longer came down to stealth, but to endurance, competition, and chance at the water's edge. The faunal record from Nanadala underscores this pressure. The site is dominated by remains and tracks of Maradisaurian captahinids, including Tramontanosaurus ti, a medium-sized reptile armored in tough scales. Alongside them were early dicynodonts, robust-beaked herbivores that would later become widespread across Pangaea. Evidence also points to pelycosaur-grade synapsids in the community, adding further depth to the prey base. Together, these animals filled the role of primary consumers, and their presence marked out a food web capable of sustaining predators. For a therapsid with an 18-centimeter skull, this community presented daunting odds. It is likely that prey animals were equal to or larger than themselves. Yet natural stressors tilted the table. Juvenile captahinids, weakened dicynodonts, and thirsty individuals cut off from shelter would have been vulnerable. Concentrations around shrinking ponds would only have amplified those chances in crowded conditions. Even a small carnivore could strike quickly and retreat. In that stress-packed setting, a semi-erect predator had advantages that a sprawling rival could not match. The dynamic shifted from season to season, but one constant remained. Unlike South African basins, where larger Gorgonopsians appeared later in the Permian, equatorial Mallorca had no evidence of bigger apex carnivores. Amphibious hunters struggled under prolonged drought. Archosaurs had not yet entered the stage. Within this isolated niche, the Mallorcan Gorgonopsian stood as the top predator by default, not for its size, but for its tools, saber-like canines, robust forelimbs and legs capable of more efficient pursuit. The fossil site itself hints at the precariousness of life. Taphonomic evidence matches the profile of a shrinking, waterhole vertebrate skeletons preserved in floodplain depressions, often showing signs of dehydration rather than predation. Adult and juvenile carcasses alike accumulated as the environment claimed them. This background makes the role of the predator clearer. It was not simply hunting in a rich savanna, but exploiting a system where death was common and where any edge in stamina or agility could provide meals when pickings grew thin. In that ecosystem, even small carnivores mattered. They shaped herd dynamics at stressed waterholes, applied pressure on vulnerable populations, and occupied a role more complex than a simple scavenger. Far from being a biological backwater, Mallorca's late Permian environments show predator-prey interactions as structured and competitive as those in more famous southern basins. Seasonal droughts and sudden rains did not erase ecological balance, they sharpened it. That picture of an apex predator in miniature challenges earlier assumptions about therapsid distribution, but bones can reveal more than posture and setting. Sometimes they carry evidence of interactions too intimate to ignore marks that raise the question of whether these hunters were defined only by killing or whether their behavior carried stranger, more social dimensions. Important behavioral evidence for Gorgonopsians does not come from the Mallorcan fossil itself, but from other discoveries, particularly in South Africa. Their paleontologists have found skulls bearing injuries that healed during life, including one with a broken tooth embedded in its snout. These cases provide a separate line of data distinct from the anatomical and environmental clues we've already discussed. They show that bone can sometimes preserve not just survival, but also moments of interaction, hinting at how these predators related to each other. The most striking specimen catalogued as SAM PK 11490 preserves an embedded tooth fragment surrounded by a healing bony callus. That detail alone is remarkable. It proves the host animal survived long enough for bone to remodel and seal the wound. The healing stage suggests weeks of recovery, meaning the predator managed to keep hunting and feeding while injured, an impressive show of resilience. For paleontologists, though, the bigger question is, what kind of encounter left the injury in the first place? Two explanations compete. The first is failed predation. Perhaps another animal, a prey item defending itself, drove a tooth into the attacker. The wound location, however, raises doubts. The broken tooth was embedded in the snout, not a defense-related body region like a flank or limb. This makes the second interpretation more compelling. The attacker was another Gorgonopsian, and the bite was delivered not to kill, but during face-to-face conflict. Researchers argue that the wound position, the absence of serious infection, and the non-lethal outcome align more with ritualized social biting than with a botched hunt. Such behavior has modern parallels. Face biting is well documented in carnivores today, from crocodilians to hyenas and large cats. It acts as a signal of dominance or reproductive competition, not as an attempt at outright killing. Injuries are often dramatic but survivable, just like the healed wound on the South African Gorgonopsid. In both cases, the act is about communication, a show of force within a species rather than an attack on prey. The embedded tooth therefore offers one of the earliest fossil hints that social signaling might already have played a role in theropsid life. If Gorgonopsians use their saber-like canines both to subdue prey and to assert dominance among their own kind, it changes the way we imagine them. They stop being simple, solitary hunters and instead become predators embedded in a web of social interactions, confrontations, rivalries, and perhaps hierarchies. The evidence is limited. It cannot prove group living or pack behavior, but it does push back the origins of complex animal communication far earlier than we once thought. It also reframes the role of anatomy. Enlarged canines are typically described in terms of hunting efficiency, but they could just as easily serve as visual signals the same way antlers or crests are used in other species. The fact that a Gorgonopsian tooth could puncture a conspecific skull yet leave the opponent alive suggests that these features carried a cost, but also an evolutionary signal power, dominance, or access to mates. The South African example makes this possibility concrete rather than theoretical. By treating the injury as a record of survival rather than mortality, researchers highlight the endurance of the individual animal. Even with a damaged snout, it carried on its life, healed, and left behind a fossil that tells us aggression was not always fatal. Violence structured in this way points to behavior more complex than constant hunting or random attack. Instead, these predators may have already been experimenting with the kinds of social rules that in later ages would shape mammal lineages. Taken together, the locomotion evidence from Majorca and the behavioral evidence from South Africa converge on the same insight. Gorgonopsians were already more versatile and more sophisticated than their size alone would suggest. Just one small carnivore in the tropics and one injured skull in the south give us windows into timing, posture, and interaction. And from those windows, we see a wider horizon where therapsids emerge not only as survivors, but as unexpected pioneers. The finding of this ancient Gorgonopsid in Majorca is not just another fossil discovery, it is a seismic shift in the history of mammal ancestry. It provides irrefutable proof that saber-toothed predators were already successfully navigating the tropical heart of Pangaea during the late Ciceralian, a staggering earlier arrival than previously estimated. Furthermore, the detailed anatomy of its legs confirms a critical evolutionary leap, the development of an efficient semi-erect gait that gave these therapsids a decisive advantage in chasing down prey. Ultimately, the Gorgonopsids emerge from this research as true evolutionary pioneers in terms of their timing, their geographic reach, and the sophisticated locomotion that would define the success of later mammal-like reptiles.